All right. Okay.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
our
Got it.
mandatory 5 minutes past 7 in Madison. I'm in Denmark right now. Hi. And as usual, my name is Nita. So it's 2:05 in the morning, and that's why the window behind me is really, really dark. But that doesn't matter because we're all here. And I'm very happy to see you again at this second to the last meeting in the National Danish Book Club. And as you know, Desiree has been doing the interview. I hope you had a chance to see the interview with our author for this time. And if you haven't, you can always catch up on it because it's at the YouTube of Tova's Northwest Association. So you can find it and see it. And let me start out by my usual little kind of information sheet here that we, the National Danish Book Club and the literary series events, we are supported financially by the Scandinavian Foundation, the Danish American Heritage Society, University of Washington, Scan Studies Department in Seattle. And we have promotional partners, the National Foundation for Danish America, Elverhøj Museum, and the National Nordic Museum. Finally, the programs are a collaboration of Museum of Danish America and the Northwest Danish Association. And Desiree always says the same things and does it much nicer than I do, but we are very, very grateful to our sponsors. And at the moment, Susan was asking, so what happens after our next book, which is the last one? Well, Desiree and I are actively looking for sponsors so we can continue our series. This is our second season, and we would definitely like to see it continue. So we are putting together letters and grant writings to approach various foundations, publishers, etc., in the US, so we can continue spreading what we really find to be very interesting and essential knowledge about Danish culture via literature. As you know, we believe strongly that literature carries the culture of the country, and it's worth discussing at the same time. I don't know if you want to supplement at this point, Desiree?
I think you covered it very nicely.
I covered it.
May I
Okay.
ask a question? Have you approached any of the library districts in the various, because they support, at least in Washington, they support a language learning app. And I'm wondering if other states in the United States or Canada or wherever do this. And I'm wondering if you've approached any library associations.
I think we will, because so far what we've done is, I mean, what Desiree has collected is like 200 sources that we can actually approach. But we'll let you know what happens. And of course, we're keeping our fingers crossed. And today we have read a book that, again, is very different. So we're trying to be, spreading out and covering a lot of different genres. This is the first time I've read this book. And so, of course, I've read it a couple of times, but I've seen the author because she's quite active in the Danish scene. She gives lectures, she gives podcasts, and of course, she's an activist for her cause. So I've seen her talk about various problems and how to overcome them and how to deal with this issue of child abuse, child neglect, and just anything horrible happening in childhood in Denmark. And I think that it's very obvious that you can spread it out to cover children anywhere. So I'm very happy that we're discussing this book, even though it's more nonfiction than what we've been doing, but it definitely attacks and approaches a problem that is worth discussing, worth thinking about, and at the bottom line, finding a solution to dealing with this problem. I want to start, as usual, with just a very brief reading. I send out questions, but as you could see, if you check the questions out, they're very much what happens and why does it happen and why does she feel this way? But what she says and what she also repeated in her interview was, whether you're a neighbor, a social worker, a school teacher, or a grandparent, you must and should act. So I think that the big question for me after reading the book, which was actually what I ended my questions with, was why did she write this book? It's a very stark, naked, graphically descriptive, very upsetting book to read. Why did she do it? And I don't know if that was where you started as well, or where you think a discussion of this book should start, but that was what I thought I would take as my starting point. So let me know how you feel. Does it have a purpose? Is it necessary? Is she
This is really necessary. This book is necessary.
Yes.
You asked about the prologue, and I thought it was her vindication for being able to climb out of the pit, frankly, and that she's been able to make something of herself, but it was also with all the help that she received. And it seems to me that this would be a poster that the Danish government should continue to support programs that help children. And I know that in our family, we're watching Unit 1 in Danish. And there's a scene there where they drop a kid off at the orphanage. And my kid said, what? They can just drop them off and pick them up? And, maybe that is helpful that Denmark does it that way, because there are times when you have a teenager that's going nuts and you just wish, oh, if I only had a place to drop them off for like a few days, I could deal with it better. So I thought this book was excellent. Excellent.
I don't think it quite works that way, Linda. It would be very nice, wouldn't it, to have something relaxation period?
Yeah. Time out for good behavior as a parent.
Yeah.
But I first came to this book, I listened to it in audio, and then I bought the book for this time. And I should never have bothered with audio because there's so many letters and interesting pictures in the book that I missed. And so seeing the book, in print was very worthwhile to me.
Yeah.
However, that part about having your kids taken care of by an orphanage or by other people, it's interesting to me how not only does she describe how that functions in her life, but she also criticizes the Danish authorities for not being astute enough to figure out what really would benefit her specific situation. And I'm not quite sure how that criticism should be received by us, the readers, because I don't know enough about the system in the US of how you can be taken care of, whether it's expected that grandparents step in or somebody else, because of course, in this book, there is a grandmother, Jens' mother, the stepfather's, the very, in my mind, evil stepfather's mother who steps in. And I don't know how did you see that as kind of a role for also other grandparents to follow if you see that kind of neglect going on in your family?
There are so many people now who are raising their grandchildren because their children got into drugs and things like that.
Yeah.
So you're having people in their 70s, 60s and 70s trying to take care of young children. And yes, it would be very nice to keep the children in the family, but it's not always possible. And then in the US, you have the foster care system, which is in some ways very good, and in some ways is worse than the original home. So, if you have an extended family, if you have aunts and uncles in this, but not everybody has that. So, yeah, I at this point, I don't know. I can't even think of what bothered me though was I was glad she got all that help, but her brothers got nothing.
Nothing.
It's as if like they weren't worth investing the time and money in. And they so one brother committed suicide, another one ended up in jail, another one died from complications from drinking. So why did they do nothing for the brothers? That was one of my big questions.
But I think she asks that question herself. She shows how
Right.
she was, she was dealt with differently. And I'm not sure what you can assign to that. But if I may go back to what you just said, Nita, in terms of two things that stood out, it is a call for action. And I think that's why she puts in the paragraph that you read, because she's telling us we need to ask questions. It's kind of that saying that goes these days, if you see something, say something, because people don't. People are afraid to ask those questions. And that's what sat with me. There were so many people in her life, social services, foster care, orphanage, social workers, who never asked the questions. They never said to her, is somebody harming you? And I thought that was actually really sad to see. So I think the criticism that she's levying towards the government is very valid. And I think as a reader, that's what we should be paying attention to as well, because she's highlighting that there were a lot of people who she could have had those conversations with, and nobody seemed to ask a very, very basic question.
But she said herself that she sat and didn't say anything, that she
Later
never
on, yes, later on. But how I read the book in the first instances when she's in, I think the first time she goes to the orphanage or has contact with social services, they didn't ask that question.
Yeah, it's true.
I'm assuming because she didn't speak to it. Maybe she doesn't remember. I mean, she recognizes that as well.
But even when she was older, it took a huge amount of effort to enable her to speak about it.
Yeah.
I mean, she had so locked it in and repressed it and held it down that I don't know if she could have, you know. Earlier.
She might not have been able to, but it stood out to me that nobody seemed to,
Yes.
because you're right. A lot of victims, especially people who suffer sexual abuse as children, they don't talk about it, I think actually on average, until they're in their 50s. And so that's the problem that she's obviously facing. But I feel like as a society, we fail our children when we don't at least check in, that we don't assume that something could be going on.
Yeah.
Considering, and I'm being stereotypical, but considering the environment that she's growing up in, the chances of there being abuse was high. She was highly vulnerable and at high risk for both sexual as well as physical abuse.
But it happens in all demographics. It's not just confined to poor people or single parents or whatever. It happens in rich families. It happens in poor families. And people don't want to, they don't like the assumption that a parent might be doing something. It's like, oh no, parents love their children, they would never do it. But that's not true. And you're absolutely right. Nobody asked the question.
I think
Perhaps
it's the bystander, it's the bystander who is not the bystander who's passive, right? And I think it happens a lot because to do something takes more effort than to not do something. And it goes back to exactly what you said, Susan. People don't want to acknowledge that this is happening, because then it also, I think sometimes people feel that it says something about themselves, because how could they be friends with that person who is doing that perpetration? How could they have that person as a neighbor? What does that say about them? Which is, again, silly.
Yeah.
You're not in control of other people's behaviors, right? And I'll Desiree, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think you're saying so many important things there. And I've discussed this frequently with other people. And I think that's where both the beauty and the ugliness also of a society like the Danish one comes in, that there are multiple resources provided by the state. And that also means because of the high taxes, I strongly believe that people feel I pay into the system. I wash my hands. I have no responsibility. And that also at second layer maybe is, or I don't know how many layers there are, but that no one likes to meddle in other people's businesses. And, ooh, I don't want to like assume something, or it's not my business, or what goes on behind closed doors and all that. And then you can kind of, feel that you're home free because I do pay my taxes for the government to take care of this. And there is this perception, right, that the government is kind of our parents in a way. And I really believe that that is great in many areas, but it also takes the responsibility away from people who could have access to knowledge if they just took that tiny little step and
Yeah.
dared to ask.
And the thing is, I pay my taxes, let the government take care of it. The government is not watching everybody all the time. And then when the government fails, those same people say, but I paid you to do that. That's your job. Why didn't you do it? Because we have to realize we're all in it together.
And it's very hard. I mean, just to share a little bit of, I had somewhat of the same upbringing. I was trained into to answering questions. Should there be questions from the authorities or from social workers? I was trained to answer in a certain way so that we wouldn't be taken away. And people working close to kids, they know this. People working with vulnerable children, they know this. Children don't. I didn't, but there is, if you have that responsibility as a social worker, you have to embrace the uncomfortable. That's just my 2 cents.
I also think that what was interesting to me, based on my experiences in the Danish society, is that it's very difficult to remove children because of neglect. I'm sorry about my cough, by the way. It's allergies and whatnot. So I'm sucking on something here to not cough at you. But it's difficult to remove children. And yet in this book, she makes it sound so easy. Yeah. She makes it sound as if when she takes agency at 12 years old and calls the orphanage and they come and pick her up, it sounds amazing. And I think it may also be because of the fact that she's in, as I said in my questions, you know, the rotten banana. And that's just a word for the outskirts of Danish society, where you are out kind of in the boonies, and people are not really that aware. And it's okay with lower social classes, and you're okay if you go to the local bar, and it's just what everybody does. And drinking is ubiquitous and acceptable. So I think that that's a very interesting background, because one of the things, being a mother myself, that I focused on was, oh my God, what is going on in this mother's head? How does she perceive herself as an adult with 4 kids at the age of 24 and just a slew of various stepfathers, various men, and various bars and various drinking issues, and once on anti-abuse and ooh, now I'm going in the right direction and so on. That is what I wonder about, because it appears to me, and I don't know if this is strange to you, she loves her mother. She's worried about losing her mother and her stepdad. What am I going to do? She says, what am I going to do with my life if they're not here? And yet they are the cause of all her misery and social instability.
I wondered how she was ever able to forgive her mother and establish a relationship with. That was one thing that stood out. She didn't go into it in great detail, but she said that she was able to establish a relationship with. I could not imagine being able to do that. I mean, I would not be so kind.
No, I mean,
So
no.
in the documentary, she asks her mom that question, Nita, like, how you were a mom, I'm a mom now. There's so many things I don't understand, because now I know and recognize those mom feelings. And the mom said, and I think that's very typical for that type of women, that, you know, what could I have done? What could I do? It was like, it was so bad for me. I didn't know what to do. Right. So kind of putting yourself first. And then she even says, I couldn't do anything. And then she's kind of pushed a little bit by the author, saying, you weren't strapped to the home, you weren't locked in, you could actually have moved or left. And they just can't think outside of that. They're in that world, apparently. And then I think the relationship might have something to do with, in those mother-daughter, maybe more than son-mother, I don't know, but it's as if the roles are upside down, right? The daughter has the the maturity, is the listener, is the one caring for the mother more than the mother caring as a mom for the daughter. So
Mhm.
taking on that responsibility, I think that's what still sticks in this book, that you feel compassion, you don't, because, and you've also been repressed, is that the word, so long that you don't necessarily feel that she's been bad to you. I think, I don't know, that's, what do you guys think?
I think you made a very good point about the roles being reversed. Maybe that's why she was able to forgive her, because she took on the role of a mother forgiving her child for doing something bad. And I think that's a very good point, that that's why she was able to.
I think it's also part of the familiar, you know, her upbringing, it's what she knows. Her mom is who she knows. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And her mom is stuck in her own abusive cycle. And like Desiree said, it's hard to see outside of that sometimes. And I think we also see that she finds it hard to admit what actually happened. Is that, again, a repression that she's choosing not to remember? Or what is that? But I think a lot of it's the familiarity of everything. And that's also the shame of it.
Yeah, I've never understood it. A friend of mine finally explained it to me. I said, I never understood that people make the excuse, oh, I was drunk, I don't remember. You know, and so I asked him, I said, well, this blackout thing, is that real? And he said, yes, that when he was drinking, you could tell him he did something, absolutely didn't remember, did not remember it happening. What he said was, though, when he stopped drinking, and he stopped at a relatively young age, that might have something to do with it. When he stopped, all the memories started coming back, and they were horrible. So I think maybe her mother stopped so late in life that, I mean, maybe there was, you know, brain damage or what, so.
Well, it sounds like it. But I mean, to take it one step further, her mother was a participant in the sexual abuse that was going on. And of course, you can define sexual abuse in different ways. I'm sure that there are so many different levels of sexual abuse, because it wasn't, to me, the way I read it, it wasn't exactly rape in the beginning. I mean, it wasn't, you know, fulfilled coital rape, but it was definitely a rape of her privacy, her feelings, her body, and her mom was a part of that.
Yeah.
And that was another thing that I found interesting in the book, the way she presents that very factually, very unemotionally. Okay, it just happened. Oh yeah, it felt nice when he was touching me. And later on, when she's raped for real the first time by a peer, and she says, well, I just gave up because I knew it wasn't really, I couldn't fight it, and I just kind of had to accept it. How did you perceive that? Was that just me who thought, wow, she's definitely taken a very lackadaisical approach to that? Is that another survivor's kind of last resort? That's what you do. If you can't change it, you just say, okay, well, I guess this happens. That's right.
Well, I think it has to do with, there's also a place where she describes that she did not feel pain or headaches or anything. I think if you come from a circumstance like she does, you are able to completely detach any feelings, any emotions, any physical sensation from yourself. So it's not as if it happens to someone else, but you know it happens to you. But in order to survive, you can't deal with it that in a way where you feel not sorry for yourself, but where you feel like you are a victim. Because if you are a victim, this is just my interpretation, but if you are a victim, you might as well give up. Then you don't move forward. You don't fight. You have to endure what you have to endure when you cannot escape it, like you can't when you're a kid. But when you can escape it, then you fight. That's at least how I read what she wrote.
Mhm.
And I think at certain points through there, she had already found that core in herself. You know, she talks in How Do We Avoid Passing This Down from Generation to Generation in the 5 points. And she talks about that spark, that the kid
Mhm.
has to have a spark. And I think maybe that's the difference between her and her brothers, that she had that spark and that they didn't, or at least it was not perceived by others. But she developed that spark really early, and she could let this other stuff happen like above her or to another self or something like that. But she had a core that she held on to.
She was really bright and did receive some good
Mhm.
feedback because of that. That was the thing she could do and do well. And so she clung to it. I mean, it was like her life, it saved her life almost.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure the brothers are quite so bright.
Well, she said that Renee was brilliant. She said her
Mhm.
brother Renee
Yeah.
was, she found that he was talented and brilliant and all that. But the thing is, I don't think that someone should be helped just because they're smart. I think everybody deserves somebody to take that, you know. I mean, she got the attention because she was so good in school and all this, and the boys were just kind of let run wild. So I think everybody should be helped, not just the exceptional people.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, there's resources and then there's a limit to resources, but I think the goal is to help everybody. If you know, if we can do that. So
Well, and if I may go back to, because I agree with what everyone's saying, and I think going back to how she presents it, I appreciated how she presented it, because
Yeah.
it has to be presented in a non-dramatic way, because it wasn't dramatic. And I think that honored what she experienced, and I think that's what people need to see. Just that was just the reality of it. There wasn't anything like it was just what it was. And I think that speaks to the commonality of it, again, the familiarity of it, that this is just the way it is. And so I appreciated how she did that. I also appreciated her disclaimer in the beginning when she said, I'm going to speak to these experiences as I experience them, not as a rational, 50-some-year-old who has gone through a lot of therapy. She's talking, from the time that she experienced it. And I think that's important too. And I think this is part of what Desiree was saying, the detachment, that she can speak to it in this way because it happened to her. This is what happened. Let's talk about it. But we don't need to be overly dramatic about it. I don't know which other word to use. So
no, that's a good word. I think it's a good description.
But the thing is, I mean, overly dramatic. Did you feel that her selection, very conscious selection of that child's point of view, did you feel that was valid as you were reading, starting at 3 years old and then kind of moving into young adulthood? How did that sit with you? I mean, did you feel that, yes, this is a valid description of how a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, etc., perceives what's going on without the drama? You're right, Christine, there's no drama. It's just laid out. This is what happened. That detachment, did you feel that was genuine, or did you feel she was stretching the point and should have dramatized it more when you were reading?
I thought it was exactly what it needed to be. This was her experience. And I think she gets to voice it the way that works for her. And I appreciated that. I think it lent, because this is where I feel like it gets tricky, right? People are going to attack her credibility and say, well, you were 3 years old. How do you remember it?
Yeah.
Well, she did. Doesn't matter. Why are we questioning that? So, and I'm not saying you are, I'm not saying anybody is, but I think I read it for what it was, and I have no reason not to believe her.
Well, I found it interesting that later on she said that what Mogans did to her felt good, but what other people did to her felt bad. And in some ways, it really plays into what the pedophiles think. I know D. Carlton Godacek, he's deceased now, and he was a Nobel laureate who was arrested and had to flee to Scandinavia for being a pedophile. But he said that children have sexuality, so if it's a consensual relationship, even though the kid's 8 years old, what's wrong with that? It seemed to me that, I'm not saying she justified pedophilia, but to a pedophile, that is really saying something, that it felt good, so like, why not?
Well, that's why
So-
we have age of consent laws.
I know, and Denmark's is 15 now, much different than the United States.
Yeah.
God only knows what it is in France, when the prime minister of France, was seduced by someone 39 when he was 15 and they're married. So who knows? It's different
it's-
culturally.
It varies by state in the United States. There is
Yes,
no,
yes.
they just bought a bill in, I think it was Montana, because there was no lower limit for how old a child could be when they married. And somebody proposed a bill to make, 16 or 18 or whatever it was. And they opposed the bill because who knows? They wanted to keep, you could marry a 13-year-old with parents' consent. I mean, to be absurd, but the fact is, no, well, you could marry an 8-year-old as long
I
as.
think that was Utah. It was Utah, I think.
I mean, I don't even care what state it was. It's just so grotesque that, how do you justify that? I don't know. The same way the man says, well, the child liked it, so I can do it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to, there was one thing, that we talked about that I'd like to return to, and that was what you were saying, several of you, that it's not just the exceptional kids that should be helped, it's everybody who needs help. And again, look at her brothers. And the reason that I want to do that is when she starts out, she says, oh, I love my mom. She's so pretty. I love my dad's eyes. And, she's gushing about her parents. And she has that beautiful little cute picture of her and her brothers. And they all look happy, healthy, well-fed, well-functioning, etc. at the orphanage, the first orphanage that she goes to, that she remembers. Then she realizes, oh, I've been here before. So it seems like this was the pattern of the mother. So why do you think, why did the boys pick up on the alcoholism that had also been the killer of their dad's parents, etc., and that seemed to be running in their generations? Because to me, it seemed as if at some point, the boys were actually getting more help. Renee was in the foster care that Lisbeth so dearly wanted to be in, and she wanted to stay with Grete, and she was pulled away. And she had all these wonderful people who were kind of stepping in, saying, yeah, she can stay here. So did the mother have anything to do with that? That's what I was wondering, because it appeared to me that at some point the mother was saying, no.
Yeah, the mother blocked it.
Yeah,
And how could she do that? And how could she have agency about her children when she was so obviously in dire need of the services of the society with the orphanages? That was to me a very strange discovery.
Yeah.
And maybe the reason that the boys failed, I don't know, because that really, that hurt me a lot, that the sons, those 3 sons, were not coming out on top like Lisbeth.
Yeah. Girls were expected to act a certain way, and boys were allowed to act a different way. I'm hoping that's changing. I mean, she did a bit of drinking herself, but I think she just voluntarily stopped. She was so focused on other things that, alcohol would have prevented her. But I found it from people I know that the boys have no interests and are not reined in and are not directed, and they go off the rails, and the girls are somewhat more protected. And that just seems to be a thing that runs through every society, even if they're egalitarian, even if there's equality of the sexes, there seems to be still that bias that girls need to more structure than boys somehow.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, because I want to come back to that.
Well, we kind of touched on it, but she was an easier kid and she was a girl. And you get money from the state if you have kids. So per kid, you get money. And I hate to sound cynical, but I'm sure that factored in as well. And I think she hints at it as well, right? So why would you give up your piggy bank?
Yeah, okay. Okay, so boys are just a different, well, boys are a different breed. And maybe, as you said, some of you, they were not as smart as she was, but her interest in school also had to be fed. And how did you feel that she was relying on those people who were trying to help her? Because it seemed to me that anger, as in the title of the book and her middle name, was such an overwhelming and overriding feature in her life. And that anger, somehow she managed to turn around and turn into some kind of growth spurt. Because I'm thinking now about that time where she had nonstop sexual encounters, one-night stands, and it seemed that that was a phase, another phase she had to go through to come out on the other side and mature. How do you feel that this anger was fueled and controlled? Because certainly in some of the orphanages, it was not a success. And she felt, well, squashed by their control, and all she wanted to do was rebel and leave and find a new life. And then others were supportive. And yet at the Hylleholt, where she was with Rimor, she ended up being incredibly angry because she was more or less forced to leave. So how did you see that? How did you see that, you know, helping these kids working out, since she was so angry?
Would you say that she was, as people say now, on the spectrum somewhat, or was it just behavioral?
Yeah, that's very difficult, Susan. That's a great question, because definitely earlier on, you were not diagnosed in the same way. I mean, your mom was diagnosed with alcoholism, right? And so you were in need of care and rescue. But I don't know. I don't think she's on the spectrum the way she reacts and acts.
I didn't see her.
Oops.
Go ahead, Linda.
I thought it was very interesting that when she mentions that children use rituals to bring stability to their lives. Now, I've wondered about that a lot for my own situation of counting and not stepping on cracks and things like that. And, you know, I see that with her, she used those rituals as a little kid, but also I think she took the tremendous anger she had and devoted it to learning Danish. And then the declension, well, she was so pissed off at German that she was going to master it, damn it. You know, I mean, she wasn't going to let it step on her. She was going to step on it. So I saw that she could channel her own anger in such a way that made it successful to get more praise that then fostered her along with it. And she still wasn't ready to give up. She told her children that they couldn't have the name Zornig, but she wasn't dropping it. So it still propels her.
And that's why I didn't see her. I think it's a great question, Susan, but yeah, I didn't see her as being on the spectrum. I saw it more a behavior that was forced on her by her circumstances and, you know, the situations that she found herself in. And going back to what you were saying, Linda, you know, it helped ground her. And I think it was her taking control over what she could. She did not have a lot of control in her life. That was one thing that she could control. And I think even when she discussed her anger and how it manifested itself in various relationships and situations, I think she still showed a lot of constraint, because she came across as very angry, but she never had like a full on, like she didn't go for somebody. She might have shouted a little bit, but she never discussed at least being, you know, physically aggressive or anything like that. So I think for me, I read it as a control issue and just a way that she could ground herself and propel herself forwards.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. And I
No,
think
I was just
yeah.
agreeing that, but nothing
Yeah,
more.
that's, I agree too. And I think that there was one passage where her mom was very surprised that she was yelling at her. And when the fact that her mom was so surprised kind of told me what, okay, so this is not a common thing in their relationship. She's actually not being abusive verbally towards her mom, which she could very well have chosen as another way to vent her anger. But it seems as if her mom was still protected by this mother role, even though she, sorry to say this, but she didn't deserve it in my mind. I mean, to be in that protective little cocoon. That's right.
I asked her about how she could like keep her composure so well, also in the documentary. I don't know if any of you have watched it, but she is asking questions but backing away. She even like goes and visits this Ian guy who molested her, right? And in the documentary, I'm sitting there like, go after them, like just tell them how you feel and what it's done to you. And I asked her about it because, and then I started thinking, they really show their true colors when she lets them show their true colors. And she said that that a lot had been cut out, first of all, which I really appreciated her being so honest. But also she was like, I talked to someone and they told me that by letting the pause of silence drag on or just see their response, which is a no response, no taking responsibility, that will show who they are instead of me going for their throat, right? And so she deliberately works with that, I think, both in her book and also in the documentary.
Thank you, Desiree. And I haven't watched your interview yet, but I'm going to, so I apologize. But I think there's also maybe something to be said for that we sometimes get angry with the safe people in our world. The people that we know are not gonna, there's not gonna suffer a consequence. Maybe that's why she feels more safe shouting at the social workers, shouting at, Lee Moore and the people around her, because they're going to be there for her. Her mom is not always going to be there for her. And what does it really do? Doesn't make a difference. So I don't know. That was another thought that I had.
I'm wondering also if her mother was in some ways very loving when she was a child, or, and maybe that's where the attachment comes from, that with all the horror that went on, when things were good, it's a typical abusive thing. The abuser can be very, very nice at times and then, show their true colors. But I'm wondering if her mother maybe was not very loving at certain times when she was very young. And maybe that's why there is that attachment, other than the natural attachment of a child for the mother.
I have to say, I think that's wishful thinking, and that's a normal mom thinking right there. And you know what you know. You don't know other families before you grow up and you see them at school. Maybe you're lucky enough to get invited home, and then you see, oh, wait a minute, they talk to their kids and they make them dinner, and So I don't know, but my guess would be that you love what you have been given.
Yeah, well,
especially when you need it. You need that family.
I questioned, I said, how come they don't yell at their kids? How come her father plays games with her? How come? And I never got a straight answer as to why, but I was very aware of the difference. It was very confusing,
But that's just it. I would like to also include the dad, the real dad, the biological dad, because to me, he was also a very interesting kind of shape-shifting figure through the book, because in the beginning, he was good, he was nice, and then he gets married to Anita, and they have a couple of kids, but he's still very nice, and she seems to really put some kind of, responsibility on him to be a good dad, and then all of a sudden he completely crushes her hopes and so on, and he continues to have children with different women, So how did you perceive him? I mean, we focus very naturally on the mother and her neglect. What about the father? Is that more acceptable? Is that more normal? Is that why he's kind of second now on this hierarchy of abusers? Or how do you see him?
Can I say something just before people answer? So it turns out again that, first of all, he answers two things in the documentary. First, she finds out that he was trying to get her brother out of the home and into his new family. And then Lisbeth is like, how do you pick? How do you pick between your kids? And he's kind of like, he didn't really know how to. And then he says, well, it was hard for my new wife. She was young and it was a lot of responsibility. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, maybe think about that. You have kids already before you find a young model, right? And she's just like not saying anything. And again, she's left with not my responsibility. I'm the dad, not my responsibility. I'm the mom, not my responsibility. They have so many excuses why they didn't do the right thing when she asks them. And no one takes responsibility.
Yeah, he was just, as far as I'm concerned, a despicable human being for leaving his daughter and his children in a situation with a drunk who brings in other drunks. And he, even if he doesn't know the details, to just like say, as you say, wash my nothing, you know. I think he was despicable. I think he was just as responsible as the mother, because he did nothing to protect his children or to nurture them, for that matter.
And I think he was maybe even more despicable, Susan, because he obviously seemed to make himself a life that functioned on different levels and that functioned in different periods, where he might have been the caring father and he might have been there for her. So to me, that seemed like he was choosing very consciously, without alcohol, to separate himself and his life from hers. And especially when she felt the big betrayal, when he called the police and had her removed from her brother's house. And she said that is just horrible, because he's just kind of, again, pulling the strings and not showing any kind of responsibility as a father. So yes, I think we kind of end up with that, standing back and saying, who's taking responsibility for the well-being, for the health, mental and physical health of this child or these children?
Well, and I think that goes back to what Desiree was speaking to, that nobody is able to hold themselves accountable in all of this. Like there's not a big revelation at the end where it's like, oh, I did that. I contributed to that. And it sounds like the documentary doesn't lend itself to that either. And I don't think we should be surprised at that. Holding yourself accountable, especially for, you know, these horrible things, is very tough. And you don't want to be judged. So it's easier to sit in silence. And I think that's the devastating part of it as well. He was very much a when it suits me father in that respect. I think he probably is going to be sitting with it saying, I did my best. And of course, he didn't want her and her three brothers staying with him, because he wouldn't have been able to manage them. And it would have influenced his new life negatively. So it was easier to, you know, stand on the sideline and watch it just all unfold. But I think again, the accountability piece, she goes to court, she testifies, and her mother is able to convince the court that she lied.
Yes.
And that was again where it's like, who is checking in on all of this?
Yeah.
I think she was 13, 14 at that time. Who is checking in with her saying, why did we assume that she lied?
Yeah, why did the mother say that? How could she? Does the mother totally believe her own version of it? Is she that, you know, out? I mean, do you think she really believed what she was saying?
No.
But it suited her. It suited her needs. Her needs come first. And that's so hard for people to understand, right? Her needs come first. She doesn't care if she cares if she throws her under the bus, but what's most important right now is the mom's survival and her mom's circumstances.
Mhm.
And then in that equation, the kids get the short end of the stick. That's how it is.
I wondered why the mother obviously was a woman who had to have a man.
Mhm.
She could not
Yes.
be without a man in her life. And as if she had no ability to take care of herself unless either a man or the state or both were taking care of her. I
Mhm.
kind of wonder what her parents were like, what they did to her. Because
Yeah.
they're, you know, to make her that without a core inside herself that says, I don't need someone
Mhm.
else.
That's That
Yeah.
speaks to the generational trauma, right? She spends a lot of
Yeah.
time in the beginning of the book talking about generational trauma, and that's what part of the reason why she tries to go back several generations to unveil what happened in my grandparents' house and my great grandparents' house. And it turns out that there is on both sides this generational trauma that is carried down through generations. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I think what you were saying, Desiree, is so true. It's all about self-preservation. I mean, that's what she's doing. And in that moment, she's, again, the mother's trying to take control over what little she has control over.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, Lisbeth, bears the brunt of that, which is, again, very sad.
And I have to say, and I think Lisbeth agrees, she said that in previous interviews, that I'm not trying to be judgy or anything, but in we in the middle and higher classes, I think we tend to look at these people with some sort of like, they are the same as us if they had the same opportunities. But there is something with the moral compass and with the what is perceived as normal and okay that is kind of skewed. And I don't know how that happens, but I strongly believe that there is a difference. There is a whole new, that's also something Lisbeth touches on, that you have to learn how to navigate in the middle class circles, where things are just so different, from behavior to what's okay to say, to how you carry yourself, to your morals. And I think that's also some of what shines through in her book.
And we have 3 minutes to find a solution, everybody.
No solution.
just thought I'd throw it out there.
Thank you.
How do you help? How do we as individuals help people, children who are like Lisbeth in a similar situation? What can we do? That's why I was finishing with her. Yes, she's got 5 points. Do we do that? Are we able to hold ourselves accountable to helping these kids? What can we do in our society today to make sure that this pattern is not perpetuated? I think it's a huge, big question. And I've been thinking a lot about it since reading the book, and I'm sure you have too, since you showed up tonight. But Desiree, do you have the kind of...
Well, I want to give everyone else a chance to say something, but I will just say, for me, I think it's about not only seeing the kid, pulling the kid in, even if it's a disgusting kid with a runny nose and dirty clothes and maybe rough manners and a loud mouth. If people open up their arms and their home and their heart and just give them a little attention, that's everything to that kid, I think.
And it depends on your role in society. I mean, I'm a retired teacher. And if you're a teacher, you do have some impact on what happens with young adults. I taught at a university and children, but I put out sheets for students at the beginning of the semester. Is there anything that will keep you from being successful in this course? And my God, I couldn't believe what I got. So I started training. I trained 8 girls on how to get rid of abusive husbands and abusive boyfriends. Wear muumuus, set your hair, don't wash, agree, a penny for your thoughts. And so I at least feel, as a retired person, I helped 8 people to escape.
Yeah.
And people that are teaching youngsters have more impact than that.
Mhm.
So if you're a social worker, or you're a teacher, you're a Girl Scout leader, or Boy Scout leader, or you're involved with kids, then you can either do a lot of good, or boy, oh boy, you can do a lot of damage.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this? Because Linda, I think you were saying it very aptly. We have to keep our eyes open, right? And do something where we can, which may not be often, may not be a lot, but may help.
I just want to say that we should always start by believing, because there's usually a reason why people bring things to our attention. So again, if you see something, say something, but also start by believing, because I think a lot of times our people around us are taught that if they say something, it's going to come back to haunt them because of the lack of accountability.
Yeah.
So I think starting by believing is very important, even if we don't want to, because it's too horrible to consider. But we don't know what goes on in people's houses.
No.
Or
No,
in
especially
churches, in hospitals, in college campuses, you name it these days. We just don't know. So why are we not believing people?
But that's what they talk about also in Denmark, in that, the outskirts, that there are many closed blinds in those houses and you have no idea. So that is a very, very appropriate and very excellent conclusion to our discussion today. Maybe open up the blinds and see what's behind, or at least peek, and try to do as much as you can, even though it can only be a little thing. Maybe it can be prizing the authorities, doing something, being there for those kids that need it. I think that book sparked the desire to do more and to try to also influence others to do more, both, in a political sense, but certainly also on the very kind of down-to-earth level of our own existence. So thank you so much, everybody, for your wonderful contributions to this very thought-provoking book. And I'm glad that she's such an activist. I'm glad that she's so much a person that is listened to and is heard and is making herself heard in the public sphere. Next time, we're also going to be reading about problems, but it's going to be in Greenland, and we're not reading it in Greenlandic. You can be very happy about that. If you don't know Greenlandic, please do check it out. It is the most complicated language, just such an amazing, beautiful language. So Rasmus Lübert, one of the best known singers from Greenland, sings in Greenlandic, and it's pure joy, but also very difficult. So we will be talking about Last Night in Nook in English, and I look forward to seeing you again for our very last performance here in May. So take care, everybody, and thank you so much for showing up.
Could I just ask Linda a question? You said you were watching Unit 1. Is that
it's Rise Holden.
Well,
and
I'm
they
watching
have
it too. I am also watching
they
it.
have a station that has all kinds of Nordic shows on it. I forget what it's called.
Yeah, because I'm watching the same show.
Okay, they have that with the English subtitles, but if you go onto Danish television, don't be turned off that it says you can't get it because you're not in Denmark. Just keep pressing the buttons and you'll get it. But what you'll get is all of the Danish shows seem to be subtitled in Danish.
Good.
I can read the Danish more than I can understand it.
Yeah.
So that Unit 1, High to Hold It, that's one of Mads Mikkelsen's first
Right.
films.
Yes. Somebody just said,
Linda, what's the channel? Yeah.
I got it through Roku channel. Roku channel.
The Roku
Viaplay,
channel. Oh, I don't know what
has Viaplay as one of
Viaplay has all kinds of Scandinavian. I have to say mostly Swedish, but lots of Danish and Norwegian. Great movies, and they have the English subtitles. Whereas when you go on to DK television, then you'll see it in Danish and with Danish subtitles, which makes me think that the accents are so far out across Denmark that if people can read it, they can understand it better.
Yeah, when I listen to the radio, and somebody, it's the standard kind of Copenhagen, very fast speech, but then someone comes on from a different part of the country and it's like, whoa, you can really hear the difference.
Wait a second. I'm listening to radio from Greenland, from Nook, and they speak much slower Danish, much
Oh,
easier
good.
to understand. I'm telling
I'm going
you.
to try that one
So
then.
there
Thank you.
go. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, hi.
Have a good night.